Let's take a moment to arrive together, not by doing anything, just by noticing your breath, your body, the space you're in. No need to change it. No need to deepen it. Just notice that you're here. You're already aware of this moment, aware of this space, aware of yourself sitting here listening. And that awareness, that quiet presence, is where everything begins. And that's enough. Welcome back to the garden. As we begin, notice this gently. There is a quiet steadiness in this space, not something outside of you, but something you are already a part of. A presence that does not rush you, does not pressure you, does not demand that you become anything other than what you are. Here, we don't force growth. We create space for the truth to unfold. Everything shared here is an invitation. Take what resonates, let the rest pass. The garden does not require agreement, only honesty. Today, we begin with the first movement of the journey, awakening, what we often call the stirring of the soul. Awakening doesn't always begin with clarity. It often begins with a quiet unrest, a sense that something isn't quite aligned. Life may look the same on the outside, but internally, something begins to shift. A question arises, a longing you can't quite explain, a feeling that there is more than what you've always been taught to chase. You might feel mentally full of questions, unsure, searching, emotionally tender, unsettled, sensitive, physically restless, tired, even disoriented, and spiritually drawn towards something unseen, something you can feel but not yet name. And this is important to understand. This discomfort is not failure. It is not something going wrong. It is the soul waking up. And there's wisdom that has described this moment long before us. From the Gospel of Thomas, let the one who seeks continue seeking until they find. Because awakening begins with seeking. Not certainty, not clarity, but a question, a longing, a sense that something within you is asking for more. That quiet unrest you feel, that curiosity, that subtle sense that something isn't fully aligned, that is the seeking. It's the part of you that refuses to settle for what doesn't feel true. The part of you that keeps asking, even when you don't have the answers. And this is important to understand. Seeking is not a sign that something is missing. It's a sign that something is being remembered. Because the soul does not seek what it has never known. It seeks what it recognizes, even if it cannot yet explain it. And that's why awakening can feel so disorienting, because you are beginning to sense something real before you fully understand it. Sometimes it helps to understand something by seeing how differently it can be experienced, because awakening doesn't always feel the same. There's a story I once saw in a film. The main character begins to feel like something is coming after her. She can't fully explain it, just a quiet, eerie knowing that something is trying to find her. And as the story unfolds, that feeling becomes very real. She and her family are confronted by people who look exactly like them, doppelgangers, versions of themselves that seem to be there to replace them. And the entire experience becomes a fight to survive, to escape, to protect herself from what feels like a threat. By the end of the story, everything shifts, because what she feared was never truly separate from her. And what she believed to be herself was not what she thought. The one who was seen as a threat was actually the original. And in the end, the one who carried the truth doesn't survive. And that's what fear can do. It can cause us to protect what isn't truly us and reject what is. There's another story from the life of Samuel. As a young boy, he's lying down to sleep when he hears his name being called. He immediately assumes it's his mentor, Eli, so he runs to him. "Here I am. You called me." But Eli hadn't called him. This happens again and again. Each time he hears the voice, and each time he looks for it outside of himself, until finally Eli realizes what's happening and tells him, "The next time you hear the voice, don't come to me, stay where you are, and respond, 'Speak, I'm listening.'" So Samuel returns, and this time, when the voice calls, he doesn't run outward, he stays. He listens, and everything changes. The confusion disappears, the voice becomes clear, and he begins to step into who he truly is. And this is where something begins to shift, because When we hear the word worship, many of us think of something external: singing, gatherings, ritual. But worship at its core is not performance, it is attention. It is the way we turn inward and become present with what is already here. In the early stages of awakening, worship often looks like reaching, searching, trying to find something just beyond us. But as the journey deepens, worship becomes quieter, less about speaking and more about listening. And what we see in Samuel, at first he runs outward, but the moment he stays, the moment he listens, everything opens. Worship is not how loudly you call out, it is how deeply you are willing to listen. Because what we are listening for is not separate from us. Worship becomes the space where awakening can gently unfold. And this is something important to notice. It's not how awakening feels, it's where it leads. In the first story, the experience is driven by fear, by resistance, by the belief that something other is a threat. And even when truth is revealed, it comes through struggle, through misidentification, through loss. In the second story, there is confusion, but not fear. And when understanding comes, the response shifts. He listens, he receives, and from that place, clarity emerges. Both were awakenings, but the outcomes were very different. And there's something else to notice here, something subtle, but deeply important. In the second story, Samuel wasn't alone. He had someone who had walked this path before, someone who could recognize what was happening even when he couldn't. At first, he misunderstood the experience. He thought the voice was coming from somewhere outside of him, so he ran outward again and again. But because someone was there, someone with awareness, someone with understanding, he was gently redirected, not corrected with force, just guided. Stay, listen, respond from where you are. And that guidance changed everything, because the awakening itself was not the difference. The voice was already there. The experience was already happening. The difference was support. In the first story, there was no one to help her understand what she was experiencing. No one to reflect truth back to her. No one to help her pause and listen. So the experience became something to fear, something to fight, something to survive. And this matters because many people move through awakenings this same way, not because something is wrong, but because they've never been shown how to meet it. Awakening doesn't become difficult because it's meant to be. It becomes difficult when we don't know yet how to meet it. And this is why spaces like this matter. Not to lead your path, not to tell you what to believe, but to remind you when something begins to stir within you, you are not alone in it. And if I'm honest, I've experienced both of these paths. There was a time in my own awakening where it felt much closer to the first story. Confusing, overwhelming, even a little frightening at times. Not because something was actually coming after me, but because I didn't understand what was happening with me. So I did what many of us do. I resisted it. I questioned it. I tried to control it. I tried to cast it out. I tried to make sense of it before I was ready to listen to it. And in that resistance, everything felt louder, more intense, more chaotic. Not because it was, but because I was meeting it with fear. And I can see now, I was treating parts of myself like they didn't belong, like they were something to figure out or fix or even get rid of. And that created distance. It created tension. It made the experience feel like something I had to survive. But over time, something began to shift. Not all at once, not perfectly, but gently. I began to slow down, to pause instead of react, to listen instead of immediately trying to understand. And in that space, my experiences started to feel very different, less like something was happening to me and more like something was being revealed within me. And that's when I started to feel more like the second story, like Samuel. I stopped running outward for answers. I stopped assuming the voice was somewhere outside of me. And instead, I stayed. I listened. And what once felt confusing became clear. Not because I forced clarity, but because I created space for it. And that's when I realized something important. The awakening didn't change, my relationship did. And that's why this matters. Because you may find yourself in either of these experiences, and neither one means you're doing it wrong. It simply reveals how you're meeting what's arising. And the moment things begin to shift, the experience begins to shift with it. Awakening didn't become peaceful because it changed. It became peaceful because I did. And this is what we begin to see. It's not just the awakening itself, but how we meet it that shapes the path forward. Awakening opens the door, but our response determines how we walk through it. Because what we often experience as other is something we have not yet recognized within. The mind creates separation, it labels, it judges, it decides what is good and what is not. And in doing so, it creates distance. But when that separation begins to dissolve, something shifts. We stop resisting. We stop fighting. We stop trying to divide ourselves into parts that belong and parts that do not. And instead, we begin to understand. We begin to listen, to integrate. And that shift from resistance to recognition is what allows the journey to continue unfolding. Because awakening is only the beginning. It opens the door, but what comes next depends on how we respond.
So as you move through your days, may you begin to recognize the quiet stirrings within you, not as something to fear, but as something calling you home. May you allow your questions to exist without rushing for answers. May you trust that not knowing is part of the unfolding. May you learn to listen, not just for clarity, but for presence. May your awakening feel less like chaos and more like recognition. May you remember gently, again and again, that what you are seeking is not separate from you, and that the voice you are learning to hear has been with you all along.